So these are the documented referral sources for mental health services around the country. And so it kind of feels often like all roads lead to mental health services. I'll just go through this really quickly. These are some of the new mental disorders that they are discussing bringing in the DSM. DSM-5 in 2013. Temper dysregulation disorder with dysphonia is described, the indicators are a child, I think under the age of 4 or under the age of 2 or something, who throws a tantrum in response to expected stresses, and the dysphonia is they yell during the tantrum. So 2-year-old tantrums are now a mental disorder. Moderate anxiety disorder, the indicators are sometimes worries about some things. So that's a mental disorder now. Night eating syndrome, which is Deb's personal favourite, and every teenager in the country could be diagnosed with.
And me.
And you too. Well, what a youthful woman you are, love. Generalised worry disorder used to be called generalised anxiety disorder, but they're discussing whether worry is kind of broader and more encompassing than anxiety. Nightmare disorder, having nightmares now is a mental disorder. And this is my personal favourite, developmental coordination disorder. The indicators are bumps into things and is clumsy. And the last one is communication disorder not otherwise specified. And the indicators for that are a voice that's too loud or too soft. Like according to who? But they're debating putting that into the... So as I say, more and more people are being captured within the net of having a mental disorder. And in New Zealand, unlike other countries, medication is accepted as a first-line treatment for these psychiatric disorders. I said before that we had 5 times the rate of youth suicide as the UK. In the UK, it is required in the clinical guidelines that if a young person is diagnosed with depression or anxiety or whatever, that it's mandatory to trial talking therapy for a period of 3 months before you even consider medication. In New Zealand, psychiatrists are on the record as saying that it is more cost effective to provide the drugs first, and if they don't work, then to provide talking therapy. Well, that's what they did with my son, but he died 15 days after they gave him the drug, and so there wasn't time for the talking therapy. So I guess that was reasonably cost effective. But we, MedSafe in New Zealand, the government drug regulator, says these drugs are not approved for people under the age of 18 in New Zealand. But last year we wrote 15,000 prescriptions for those drugs because our legislation allows them to prescribe off-label, which is unapproved medications. The regulator says the reason they're not approved for people under the age of 18 in New Zealand is that the risks outweigh the benefits, and yet we wrote 15,000 prescriptions last year, and some of them were for babies under the age of 1 year old. And when the New Zealand Herald went to a paediatrician at Starship Hospital and said, "What do you think about this business of giving antidepressants to babies under the age of 1?" the paediatrician said, "Those figures have to be wrong. Nobody would give a baby antidepressants. That is appalling, and I would never do it." And when they went to New Zealand's leading child adolescent psychiatrist, he said, "There's no evidence that there's any harm caused to babies by giving them antidepressants." It's really different. In 2008, the year my son died, he was awarded a Queen's Service Medal for services to children and adolescents in New Zealand. Most clinical trials of antidepressants last 4 to 8 weeks. So they tell us very little about what happens after that time, but they tell us that within that 4 to 8 week period, the risk of suicide, suicidal thinking, suicidal behaviour is doubled. A recent Canadian study followed children aged 12 to 18 over a 9-year period on these drugs, and what they found was that those on antidepressants were actually 5 times more likely to commit suicide than kids in the general population. A recent Swedish study showed a really high percentage of suicides have antidepressants in their post-mortem blood. In New Zealand, we use that to justify the prescribing of antidepressants. We say, and the pamphlet my son was given said, there is clearly no link between completed suicide and antidepressants because when we do toxicology reports on people who've died from suicide, we don't find antidepressants in their blood. So that sounded pretty compelling to me. Well, after Toran died, about half an hour afterwards, the coroner rang me and said, what should we be testing your son's blood for? And I said, alcohol. I knew he'd been drinking that day, and Prozac. And he said, okay, thanks, we'll do that. A few weeks later, I get the toxicology reports back. Alcohol, no Prozac. Now, the police had taken Toran's box of Prozac that he'd been given 15 days beforehand, and there were 21.5 tablets missing from it. So how did Prozac not show up in his blood? So I went back to the police and said, I don't understand this. There had to be Prozac in his system. And the police, annoying mother, blah, 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 but they went and had a look and they said, oh gosh, we forgot to put that on the form. We only asked ESR to test it for alcohol. So I said, well, can you do it again, please? Yep, sorry. So they do it again, and a few weeks later the toxicology report comes back, and again it says alcohol present. Tested for fluoxetine, which is Prozac, none detected. I knew it couldn't be right. And so I rang the police again, and I said, there's something wrong with this test. We know he took 410 milligrams of Prozac in a 15-day period. That's what he was supposed to take. This has to be wrong. Well, I got yelled and screamed at by the police officer who told me I was trying to waste taxpayers' money, that I just needed to accept the fact that fluoxetine had not been present in my son's blood, therefore had bore no relation to his death, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I think you're wrong, and I'm going to ring up ESR myself and I'm going to talk to the scientist who did this test. Well, I was met with absolute horror. It'd be ridiculous, you're just a mother, you can't ring up a scientist. And I was like, well, you watch me. So I rang ESR, and the woman who answered the phone, who was a scientist, I said, hello, my name's Maria Bradshaw and I'm Toran Henry's mum. Toran committed suicide a couple of weeks ago, and I just wanted to talk about his blood test results. And she went, oh my God, I heard you on the radio with Polly Gillespie this morning. She said, I cried all the way to work. What can I do to help you? And I said, could you explain to me what's happened? How, can you get a false negative with this test or whatever? And she said, no, hun, but we do use the cheapest test possible. I can run a more sensitive and more expensive test for you. And so she did, and the results of the third toxicology test came back and detected Prozac in Toran's system. But more importantly than that, what they realised was that the test that they've been using for the last 20 years actually is not capable of detecting Prozac. And so us being told, well, clearly there's no link between Prozac and completed suicide because we didn't find it in people's blood. Of course you didn't, because your test can't detect it. That was quite a long rant, wasn't it?
Have they changed the test?
Well, that is the $64,000 question. I was hoping, because all that evidence was presented at my son's inquest, and I hoped that the coroner would make a recommendation that it should be mandatory to use this more expensive test.
There's no point doing the other one, is it really?
No, but the coroner completely ignored the issue. So now I need to go back to ESR and say, what are you doing? What's happening with this? And lobby for it.
And lobby and get it out.
If that's the case. I mean, I thought, surely the coroner will pick up on this.
Right, that's a bit silly.
Yeah, he didn't want to know. As we said before, the Ministry of Health study showed increased prescribing is causally linked with increased serious suicide attempts. These are research reports. Professor Healy testified at my son's inquest. He's a psychiatrist and a psychopharmacologist from the University of Wales. He's one of the world's leading experts on Prozac and other antidepressants and other psychotropic drugs. He, in evidence to the coroner, said that there is absolute compelling case that these drugs cause suicide and homicide. The coroner chose to ignore him, but his research is very compelling, very interesting, and it's on his CV, the evidence that he gave at Toran's inquest is on our website, and his research is widely available on the internet. The Kirsch meta-analysis is a study that was published in 2008. To get approval for a new drug, especially for children, you've got to get approval in the United States from the FDA. But all you have to do is present 2 studies that show benefits.